Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, thanks for coming, comrades. I think look forward to a really interesting meeting. I mean, obviously, under conditions as we've seen, where Palestine is the cockpit of the in many ways the cockpit of the crisis of the imperial system itself. Under conditions in which the Israeli state is attempting genocide on the Palestinian people to a global reaction, as we have seen in Italy in particular this week. Over 2 million workers on strike for Palestine. It's an unprecedented action, I think, certainly in Europe, and numerous other actions as well over nearly 2 years. The comrade Ofer Cassif, of course, is a member of the Knesset. He has the misfortune, of course, of having to share a room with many of these people who are actually, personally and intimately politically responsible for what is going on. But of course, then means, of course, he's has a unique perspective on the entire piece and on the crisis, of course, of Israeli society and the state itself. So I look forward to really to hearing what the comrade has to say. Over to you, Ofer.
Thank you very much and for having me. And I would like to begin with what happened on 7th of October 23, because too many people, including in the left globally, refer to the massacre of October 7, 23 as if that was the beginning of history. And obviously that's not the case. We all are the Communist Party of Israel and Hadash, Palestinians and Jews. We were all against the massacre of October 7th. And we all condemned it, as we always, against targeting innocent civilians. And we also added that nothing can justify such a carnage, not even the continuous crimes of the state of Israel and the colonialist Zionist movement before, the dispossession of the Palestinians, the different massacres committed by Zionist and Israeli troops or groups, the Nakba, the occupation of 67, the siege on Gaza, etc., the ethnic cleansing. I mean, we need too many days in order to describe all atrocities that Israel is guilty of. Neither of those can justify what happened on October 7th, but by the same token, we have to emphasize that nothing can justify the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing and the starvation and other atrocities and war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israel has been committing ever since the October 7th. Because, as I said, history didn't begin there. And even if it did, it cannot justify such terrible crimes and atrocities that Israel still carries out against the Palestinian people, not only in Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank and within Israel proper. And those who argue, especially within Israel, and not only the government, the coalition and their supporters, but also the vast majority of the so-called parliamentarian opposition, they argue as if what Israel has been doing, at least until one or another stage, was a kind of a self-defense. That's poppycock, to say the least. That's a sheer lie, because the real reason behind the ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing, and fascization within Israel, which I shall refer to, the real reason was already sketched by Smotrich in his decisive plan that he published in 2017. This genocidal plan was publicly, explicitly published on the internet in English as well. Decisive plan or subjugation plan, that's up to the translation one finds. But it was published in 2017, 6 years before 7th October. And this plan has basically 3 elements. First, that Israel must annex the all occupied Palestinian territories without granting basic rights to the Palestinians, neither civil, nor political, social, etc. That means, of course, a full-fledged official apartheid system, which in practice already exists. The second point is that those Palestinians who were not going to accept their status as subjects rather than citizens, even if second or third class citizens, are going to be expelled out of their, not only of their specific lands, but of their patria, of their homeland. And third, those Palestinians who were going to resist this official apartheid oppressive regime were going to be killed. What we've been witnessing since October 7th is exactly the realization of this genocidal plan. The massacre of 7th October has been used as an excuse. But the starvation and the all atrocities, mainly the genocide, the bombarding, the killing, the targeting, including by snipers, as witnesses say, like doctors who carried out the autopsy of children who were killed. So the documents, the reports of those doctors show, and they were interviewed, it was published even in the Haaretz newspaper, let alone outside of Israel, in which, apart from Haaretz and here and there, some individual programs, the whole media is totally mobilized to the, or voluntarily, by the way, it's not mobilized by the regime, it is mobilized for the regime, but it is mobilized by, voluntary means. So, but still it was published in Haaretz and some, and definitely outside of Israel, that those children were carried out, their autopsy were carried out by doctors in Gaza, including volunteers from all over the world. They found testimonies, clear ones, that they were targeted by snipers, and that's only the tip of the bloody iceberg, which is carried as an iceberg. It is not carried by water, but by blood. And it's very clear that those atrocities, the bombarding, the targeting of civilians, as I said, including children, the systematic starvation, the prevention of medicine, the targeting of journalists that were already in Gaza, and of course the prohibition of entrance from other journalists who were not there, the targeting of hospitals and medical crews in general, and of educational and cultural institutions like universities, etc., infrastructure, all prevention of water, all those are a clear-cut definition according to the common definition accepted by the international law and the different conventions and United Nations resolutions. This is a basic element, one of the 5 that constitute the definition, the formal definition of genocide. It's not a coincidence that the vast majority of experts on genocide studies, including Israelis and Jewish ones, like me, Lee Mordecai, and Amos Goldberg, who are very prominent in that sense within Israel, they all agree that there is a genocide going on in Gaza and not a war. So we have to be very clear about it and to refrain from using the term war, because war assumes a kind of symmetry. War assumes a clash or a conflict between a combatant, military combatant, and that's not the case. There's a clear-cut genocide, and this genocide in Gaza is carried out knowingly and consciously by the government of Israel, by the coalition in the Knesset, by some of the opposition that totally support it knowingly, and by those who actually execute that policy on the ground. That is to say, the Israeli military troops. and other troops, including the secret services, etc., etc. When this is part of the realization of the genocidal decisive plan that, as I mentioned before, was published already in 2017. But there is another strategy that is carried out in the West Bank. First of all, let's not forget that in the last 2 years, more than 1,000 Palestinians, mainly civilians in the West Bank, were killed, either by the occupation forces or by settlers. And here we have to explain that the ethnic cleansing that's going on in the West Bank, again, knowingly, consciously, as a matter of policy of the government and its collaborators outside of the parliament and inside of the parliament, and of course, again, on the ground by different occupation forces, the main factor on the ground are the settlers. The settlers, the Judeo-Nazi settlers, are actually on a daily basis not only persecute and attack Palestinians, but they shoot them. They uproot their trees, they set fire into their fields and houses, more often than not where people are inside. They shoot to kill, and often do kill, Palestinian civilians, farmers, shepherds, etc., like happened to a friend of mine just a couple of 3 months ago, Awada Aladin, from the village of El-Khir in Masafar Yatta, southern Hebron, Southeast Hebron. He was shot dead, killed, assassinated, murdered deliberately by a settler who was detained for a few hours, then was sent free to his house and got back his arm, and still enter on a daily basis to the village where he killed, murdered Awada. And that's only one example. I visit very often my friends, different communities and villages in the West Bank. When I talk there to the people and I see with my bare eyes what's going on there, we are talking about a new kingdom of KKK, which is more deadly and is like in the KKK kingdom of southern United States. They are supported by the government, by the establishment, and mainly by the so-called security forces, which are in fact occupation, lethal, murderous forces, who refrain from preventing those Judeo-Nazis from killing and assaulting Palestinians. Just a couple of hours ago, I saw a video from today in which those settlers invaded a few villages in the West Bank. Farha is one of them, in which I have good friends there and I visit quite often. And they just went into the olive trees, to the area where the olive trees are grown and bred, and just, looted the olives that they were already picked by the Palestinians, and the occupation forces prevented the villagers, the Palestinian ones, from entering their own land in order to protect their harvest. This is the systematical issue. It's not a coincidence. It doesn't happen once in a lifetime. This is the policy and this is the system. And therefore, more than already 30 Palestinian communities, which constitute altogether thousands of individuals and families, already had to flee their lands and the villages and communities because of these those violent attacks by settlers under the auspices of the occupation forces and their collaboration. And hence, there is, according to all acceptable definitions, an ethnic cleansing there in the West Bank. This is another element of the very same decisive plan that I mentioned before. And the third part is the process of turning Israel into a fascist regime. We are already there. We used to shout in demonstrations for years, "No pasaran." I guess you know this slogan from the civil war in Spain. which means, of course, fascism won't pass. We are already there. Israel is a fascist regime already. We are not in a process of fascistization. We are under fascist regime. Obviously, in the 21st century, in the 20th of the 21st century, fascism doesn't take the same image as it was 100 years ago. But still it is fascism. I don't have the time to describe and to get into details exactly what fascism is. What I can say in a nutshell is that first, the supreme value in the Israeli discourse now, and let alone in the establishment, the government, and most of the opposition, the supreme value is not the individual human being, but the nation, as it were, the collective, organic, as it were, people, which is defined more poetically, if you like, as a blood and soil nationalism. That's the basis, that's, if you like, the gist of classic fascism. And everything is derived from that. Individual human beings should be sacrificed on the altar of the organic nation. That is the real reason why even Israeli soldiers and hostages are sacrificed intentionally, because they are not important. Their blood is used as the red color of the Messiah's rag or carpet. That's clearly fascism. Add to that the militarization of a society which was already militarized before, seeing the military forces as a value, see the service as a value in itself, as an end in itself. The army is not regarded in the public discourse, in the hegemonic public discourse in Israel, as a means to an end called security or defense. The army and the service in the army are regarded as ends in themselves. This is the reason why even the vast majority of the opposition, so-called, in the parliament, see the service as a must and insist that the ultra-Orthodox should serve in the army, not because there's a real need, but because they see it as a value. It's ironic that sometimes some segments in the parliamentarian opposition seem to be more fascist than the coalition in regard to the military service, for instance. And another thing which characterizes fascism is the worship of the leader. Netanyahu now, more than before, although it was there for 30 years, but now more than ever, Netanyahu is regarded as the new Duce, if you like, because as far as correct me if I'm wrong, but the participants in our chat are British mainly, aren't you? So I can say that Netanyahu is, I'm wrong? Okay, so I wanted to compare him to Oswald Mosley, but I could compare it to others. But I guess that everyone anyway knows who Oswald Mosley was. Netanyahu does resemble Mosley in the sense of a personal worship. Some people think that Netanyahu is regarded in Israel as being above the law. He's not above the law, he's the law. Because of that, and this is part of the fascism in Israel now, is that anyone who criticized Netanyahu, not only the government, is regarded as a traitor. As if Netanyahu, the state, and the people in Israel are one and the same. This is a clear characteristic of fascism. Now, on top of that, another thing that characterizes fascism is the use of violence, not only as a means which is legitimized, but also as an end in itself, as a value that unites the people. You know that during and after the First World War, there was a term that fascists invented or coined, which is called trenchocracy, which is trenches and kratia. Kratia is rule, and trench, it came from the war of the First World War in the trenches, of course. And what the meaning of trenchocracy was that the state and the people must be regarded as a military unit in the sense of an hierarchy, of a chief of staff that everybody should be subordinated and obey to, but also to the extent that the people must show not civil solidarity, not class solidarity, but military unity, like in the trenches. That's exactly what's going on now in Israel. And it is not only supported and pushed forward by the coalition and its collaborators, but by many within the parliamentarian opposition. Obviously with Lieberman and his colleagues, which are sometimes even more fascists than the coalition, but also among the party of Benjamin Gantz and Yair Lapid. The exception is, of course, first and foremost us, the Hadash people with Ta'al, the Islamic Party, and often some of the Labour members of the Knesset. And I say often and I say some, because it's not always and it's not all of them. So that's a huge danger that we've been facing within Israel, in addition, of course, to what I said before regarding the genocide and ethnic cleansing. And all those three constitute exactly the realization of the decisive plan that Smotrich, as I said, presented already 8 years ago. Now, having saying that and being sound very pessimistic, I have to say a few optimistic words. As a Marxist, I have to say that I reject any idea about any society that is analyzed as a monolithic one whole. There's nothing like that. Such an analysis may be seen by, conservatives, nationalists, even some liberals, and if I push it to the academic, philosophical, and sociological arena, by so-called modernist theoreticians and positivists who refer to each and any society as a whole that should be analyzed like functionalists do, as if there were no basically conflicts, contradictions, and tensions. I do not accept that. Each and every society should indeed be analyzed as a whole, but dialectically speaking. That is to say, a whole that consists of and characterized by contradictory moments. And that's the situation in Israel. Everything that I say thus far doesn't say that the Israeli society as a whole is a fascist, let alone Judeo-Nazi, bloodthirsty, etc., etc. The hegemony at the moment is indeed like those. But within the Israeli society, like anywhere, there are contradictions, tensions, and conflicts. And the main contradiction now is indeed between those who want to see the genocide over, even if the majority want to see that because of the faith of the hostages and the Israeli soldiers, and less so, if ever, because of the Palestinians. I shall refer to it in a second. But still, the majority in Israel now, according to the polls, around 80% of the Israeli public want the genocide over, even if they call it a war and not a genocide. For our case, that's not important. That doesn't bother me too much at the moment. And the minority, about 20%, wants to continue with the extermination of Gaza, even if it comes at the expense of the hostages, the soldiers, and the Israeli society as a whole. The messianic bigots and the collaborators. That's the main contradiction now in Israel. The hegemony is in the hands of the minority, especially because they hold the power, especially the arms. Let's not forget that the police and the prison services are already conquered by the government in general, and Ben-Gvir, the worst minister, the worst as far as the fascist scale is concerned, is probably the worst. Perhaps Smotrich is worst, never mind. He's bad enough, let's agree upon that. So the prison services and the police have been conquered, totally occupied by Ben-Gvir and the government. Same about, to a great extent, the military, the army. And now, literally today, the new chief of the security services, the Shin Bet, is a fascist Judeo-Nazi, I would say bigot, who was nominated by Netanyahu because he is. And it's very clear that he's going to launch a dirty war, like it was called in Argentina under the generals in the end of the 70s. Because of that, I prefer to use this term. A dirty war not only against the Palestinians who were victimized by the Shin Bet for ages, but everyone and anyone in the real opposition to the government and the genocide is now going to be targeted by the Shin Bet. So bear in mind that if you hear one day that I've been vanished, what could be the address? And I'm not joking. That's a real and serious risk we are all, under now. And so this minority is the powerful one. And still, it's not only the so-called security services, Shin Bet, prisons, police, military, but it's also those who control the resources, the capitalists, if you like, and mainly those who control the media. They are all parts still with the same hegemony, but, and here is a huge but, there are cracks. You can see and we can sense the change. The hegemony now is broken and is under threat. Threat as far as those who carry out the hegemony, of course, are concerned. First, as I said, the vast majority are against the continuation of the so-called war, and even though the majority is because, as I said, it's because of the hostages, still they are against it. And they speak up and take to the streets like yesterday in thousands and thousands, sometimes even millions, in a country that consists of 10 million people. It's huge. So we should not underestimate that. Quite the opposite. We should encourage that and assist that internationally, I mean also. This is one thing. The second thing is that you could see that more and more segments in the population that refrained from speaking up for different reasons, because they were terrorized, still are, because they shared the hegemonic stance. Doesn't matter at the moment why. But more and more segments begin to open their mouth and speak up against, literally using the term genocide. We can see more and more journalists speak against it. Too late and too little, but still do. We can see organizations of different workers from below, not trade unions, which in Israel is a problem in itself, but workers who organize from below, from bottom to the top, like social workers, doctors, medicine doctors, physicians, lawyers, professors at universities, teachers and masters at the schools, as I said, journalists, artists and intellectuals, writers, etc. More and more begin to speak up and to take to the streets too against the genocide. Even ex-generals. There was a few weeks ago a petition was published with the signature of no less than 600 ex-generals, including chief of staff, in plural, against the continuation of the atrocities and ethnic cleansing and war crimes. Ex-chief of staff, Bogi Ya'alon, who was a minister of defense with Netanyahu. He was a Likud person, a rightist one. He was interviewed in few Israeli channels and abroad and used the terms war crimes and ethnic cleansing against the Israeli troops. That's not a matter of nothing. So there is a change. Another thing which is immensely important to mention, I said before that the majority of the demonstrators and protesters against the ongoing genocide still use the term war and still talk and concentrate on the issue of the hostages and soldiers. But you can see that more and more begin to share with us the worry for the Palestinians too. And I think the main example is, on top of what I already said, is the block we have within the demonstrations every Saturday mainly, and sometimes during the week too, against the genocide. If in the beginning our bloc was a tiny, relatively and small one, and was very often attacked even physically by other protesters, now you can see our bloc growing stronger and much bigger. We stand every weekend, and as I said, sometimes throughout the week too, with pictures of Gazan children who were butchered by Israel. And if in the beginning we were shouted at and sometimes even physically attacked, and we were just few dozens, now we are talking about no less than thousands of individuals across the country who stand with those pictures. And especially in Tel Aviv, when you stand in such a shift, you cannot see the end of the line because there are so many people, hundreds. I personally, a few months ago, was standing there with a picture of a child that was butchered by Israel, and an ex-general, an ex-chief in the Mossad, approached me to encourage me and to shake my hand. So we can see the difference, we can see the change. As I said, it's much too little, it's definitely much too late, but it's better than nothing and never. We must encourage that. And I would like to beg your assistance, the international community in general, to support our struggle against the genocide, especially those days. And I would like to finish with a few words about the proposal of Trump's. First of all, I have to begin with two things about Trump. I do not trust him, that's for sure, to say the least. He's far from being consistent. Again, that's an understatement. So I don't know what he's going to say or do in one minute from now, because we all know that he contradicts himself by the minute. So you can never tell. This is one thing. The other thing is that he doesn't have any idea about what he's talking about. I mean, he's totally ignorant about the situation. He doesn't care. The only thing he cares about, and that in that sense, he and Netanyahu are Siamese twins, is themselves. And we have to know how to manipulate it for our end, and for our benefit. But still, we have to be very cautious. And that's one thing regarding Trump. I wouldn't like to call what he presented a few days ago alongside Netanyahu a plan, because that was not a plan. It was superficial. It was based on ignorance. There were no tactics of implementation. There was no timetable. So you cannot call it a plan. You can call it an idea, a proposal, which is on the one hand the problem. On the other hand, it may bear some good opportunities because it is like that. Now, Netanyahu already, I don't know if you happen to read about it or to watch it, but Netanyahu already, just a second, I have to do something with the air conditioner because it's terribly hot. All right. It's more than 30 degrees here. So I wanted to say that Netanyahu yesterday recorded this coward didn't dare even to stand in front of the cameras, live. He recorded the message, as usual, full of lies, deceptions, perversions, and he said, we knew about the plan. It's our plan, which is a sheer lie. This plan, quote unquote plan, yeah, was forced upon him by Trump. We all know about it. And he also said, of course, he was speaking about himself, how genius he was, how powerful he was in standing against the whole international community and the Israeli opposition, insisting that the hostages can be released without ending the so-called war and withdrawing from Gaza. So he described already this proposal of Trump's as if Israel was going to get back the hostages, which I hope will happen, of course, without ending the genocide or the so-called war and withdrawing. That's a sheer lie. And I want to see, of course, the hostages back home. I am in touch with some of their families. We are all in touch with them. We encourage them. We support them. But we also support, of course, the total end of the carnage, of the genocide in Gaza, of the destruction, of the ethnic cleansing. We want that to be over. And in order to get all of those, the release of the hostages and the prisoners, the total end of the atrocities, crimes, genocide, there must be a dialogue with the Palestinians and on equal footing, because what proposed Trump was actually something that he presented with Netanyahu. Again, it was forced upon Netanyahu, but it was with Netanyahu without any dialogue with the Palestinians. Hamas, PLO, Palestinian Authority, someone else, doesn't matter at the moment. If we want that to be over, and we do, if we want to see a total end, if we want to see reconstruction of Gaza, saving the lives of the people of Gaza, saving the lives of the hostages, we must see a real dialogue and involvement of the Palestinians, including Hamas. Whether I like them or not, it's irrelevant. Without such a dialogue, we won't see anything. Now, tomorrow, there should be, as it was published, a meeting in Egypt between representatives of Israel and Hamas, not a direct meeting, with the representatives of Egypt and Qatar, United States, etc. And I wish, I hope, and I beg everybody in the international community to do whatever possible to force the Israeli fascist government to accept a deal that will end this nightmare for Palestinians and Israelis alike. We need that. And we also need, and this is my last sentence, I promise you, we also need to continue our struggle for a just peace. And just peace will be only if and only the Palestinian people are liberated and the occupation is totally ended and the Palestinian state is an independent, sovereign Palestinian state is established alongside the state of Israel in the old territories that Israel occupied in 1967. We shall continue our struggle for that, for the benefit of everyone who lives here. Thank you for your patience, my friends.
Thank you. That was very interesting, and I'm sure there'll be huge numbers of comments and questions. Okay, so who's first? Finn?
Comrades, I want to thank Okas for a very valuable and very informative contribution, and it'll add enormously to our understanding of what the perspective is for the future. And that's my reason for raising the questions I am. So, as an active trade unionist in Ireland and socialist in Ireland, I'm trying to find a resolution to the problem, and Okas has added considerably to our body of knowledge on that question. So I want to ask a few questions. Firstly, on the issue of the history dot. And the history dot is recognised, as you know, internationally as the representative of as a confederation, representative of Israeli trade unions. But we all know its history. From its foundation, it excluded Palestinian members. It was always part of the state apparatus. It was never a trade union in the way we understand it. It was never inclusive and was never friendly towards Palestinians. Some of them were allowed to join on the fringe of the history dot. It was always part of the Zionist project. So my question is, what's happening now within history dot? And one of the reasons I ask is because before the October the 7th events that Hamas took part in, a general strike had been called by history dot against Netanyahu. So what was the meaning of that, and to what extent is there a kind of a broad issue still amongst members of history dot? So in other words, what's the perspective for the history dot? Second point is Israeli society, I understand, is a very seriously class-divided society. The division between the rich and the poor is more significant than in many other similar countries. And I understand also that one of the ways in which the regime deals with that class divide is by giving people land in the settlements, and people can't afford to buy or to rent accommodation in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, so they're given places in the settlements. So it's a way of diffusing the class struggle in Israel. Now, this is a question. Israel is a class society, like any other society, and the issues are clouded by nationalism, by fascism, as you've explained very clearly. But nonetheless, the class divide is significant. So I'd like you to maybe tell us a little bit more about the way in which you see class division developing a new politics. Now, it'll take a while. I'm not saying it's going to happen next week. It'll take a while. But what's the direction of politics to reflect the class struggle? And in that context, you might also refer to the very proud history of the Communist Party in Israel, going back over the years. Now, I know the bloc that you're referring to involves now people who would have been associated with the Communist Party, but in the past, the Communist Party was significant. What's happening now within such clearly defined class organizations such as the Communist Party? And a question also in that regard about the Labour Party. Now, like the history dot, the Labour Party was always part of the Zionist project, and some of the worst leaders of Zionism came from the Labour tradition. They come back from the very outset. Nonetheless, being a Labour Party, does that have any meaning today? Or can we dismiss it? All its links with Labour, internationalism, chemistry are gone. In which case, where do we go now? So how do we build a movement today? And just one last issue, and you referred to this and mentioned it as well. You mentioned about from the ground up, there's trade union action developing among sections like the journalists and people like that. But my question is, to what extent can we see unity between Palestinian and Israeli workers happening around us? Now, in the past, there was a united movement in the construction industry amongst masonry workers and other workers, and the people who came from the West Bank to work in Israel would have familiarized themselves with movements there. I was in the West Bank, and I saw the workers. We stayed in Bethlehem, and I saw the workers going through the cages and the security checks to work. So that their entire day was spent between travel to and from, humiliation by the security forces as they came through these cages to work in Jerusalem. That's all been stopped now, of course. That's all prevented, and the result is poverty in the West Bank. So you might comment again on this issue of uniting, or any elements or any evidence of unity between Palestinian and Israeli workers. So
Right, so-
we ask these questions with a view to finding answers to difficult questions about a class society such as exists in Israel. And I want to thank Okas again for what I consider to be a very valuable and very informative opening contribution.
Thank you very much for your questions. I hope I won't forget any ingredient of it. First of all, obviously, Israeli is a class society like any other capitalist society. And you mentioned few things which are absolutely correct. Israel is leading among the OECD in the class differences. For instance, the poverty toll in Israel is one of the highest in some respects the highest among the OECD. First and foremost, between the Palestinian citizens, I'm talking now about 21% Palestinian citizens in Israel, not about the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. But also the ultra-Orthodox constitute a very poor communities. And in the so-called periphery, I don't like this term, but for the sake of an argument, I shall use it. The periphery in Israel suffers from a huge toll of poverty, unemployment, negligence, and for instance, even death toll. In the south of Israel, the Negev, the death toll of babies, for instance, if I remember correctly, is the highest among the states of the OECD altogether. You can see that especially since the October 7th and the Galilee, the north that was bombarded by Hezbollah, and the south that was attacked by Hamas, they still haven't been reconstructed by Israel because Israel prefers to invest the money in the settlements in the occupied West Bank. So the situation of the people who were neglected and marginalized anyway before is even worse now. So you are absolutely correct. The differences, the class differences in Israel, the level of exploitation is huge. It's terribly high in comparison to other states in the OECD and even other states which are not part of the OECD. So Israel is indeed a very class exploitive society. And you also are totally right about the history of workers' organizations. The main trade union in Israel still is the Histadrut. The Histadrut was created mainly by David Ben-Gurion in 1920, almost 30 years before the partition of Palestine and the establishment of the State of Israel. And it was established not for workers' reasons. That was the excuse and the mantra. The real reason was to use it as an umbrella organization of different labor parties, Zionist labor parties, in order to unite them for the realization of the Zionist endeavor. There is a very, very, very good book which was translated into English, and I, with your permission, encourage you to read, by Ze'ev Sternal. Ze'ev Sternal was a professor at the Hebrew University. He is especially paramount and acclaimed for his research on fascism. And I said that because it's not a coincidence. He wrote a book about the Zionist labor movement, and the name of the book is Nation Building or a New Society, ? And I mention it because Ze'ev Sternhell, one of his greatest revelations, if you like, which is widely accepted by researchers of fascism, is that the origins of the fascist ideology included a revision of Marxism, like George Sorel and others. So when he wrote this book, he had in mind the question is of whether we could see elements within the Zionist labor movement that recall or echo, if you like, some resemblances with the labor movement that revised Marxism for the sake of fascism. His answer, by the way, in the bottom line was that the Histadrut, like other Zionist labor movements and parties, was much more interested in nation building than in social struggle, class social struggle. So in that sense, the Histadrut was more an instrument in the hands of Zionism rather than of class and struggle, and especially of workers' endeavors as such. Palestinians were largely excluded from the Histadrut until the 60s. So not only throughout the pre-State of Israel era, but also after. And the Histadrut was asked by the families of the hostages time and time again in the last few months to organize a general strike in order to stop the so-called war and bring back the hostages. And the chairperson of the Histadrut, which by the way is another interesting issue, that he changed, not he, the general secretary of the Histadrut doesn't exist anymore. They changed it about 30 years ago to a chairperson, which is, of course, it's not a semantic issue, it's a political one. So the chairperson of the Histadrut, which is historically associated with the Labour Party, but is very close, in close relations with Netanyahu himself, has been refusing to organize and declare a general strike, even for the sake of the hostages. So the Histadrut has been served and still is served as a means in the hands of the most reactionary forces in Israel. We, as communists, we have our representatives in the Histadrut. We try to push forward our own projects and ideas, but we are far from being a majority. And unfortunately, thus far, we haven't been very successful, but we've been trying, and I guess that we will be continuing with those attempts, but it is very difficult. Another thing that I have to say, just a second.
Can you be really brief? Because obviously we're going to try and get through.
Okay, I just try to answer all questions that the comrade raised, but if there's no time, okay, I accept.
Okay. All right. Ian, we'll try and take a batch of questions here. Ian.
Hi, yeah, thanks. First of all, solidarity against your physical attack that stopped you from speaking here the last time. And I think I agreed with every word of your presentation, except perhaps the last sentence on the two-state solution. It may be too difficult even legally for you in your position to advocate a one-state solution, but from where I'm standing in the Palestine solidarity movement in the outside world, it seems to me that a South African-style state for all the people in it, including the refugees being allowed to return, and all Israeli citizens, including Israeli Jews, would be the most favorable solution. But also, these days, the way the two-state solution's been undermined on the ground of the settlements, no less unrealistic as a demand. There's a contradictory element to the two-state solution. Netanyahu set his face so far against it that obviously it's a demand against him, but the way it's been used in the international community in the last 30 odd years has been a future fake, and the way elements like Hadash have pursued it within the Palestinian people themselves have become incredibly unpopular. So yeah, I'd just like to ask about that and leave it open to the rest of the meeting if other comrades want to discuss too. I do think your point about Israel not being a monolith is a very important one, and actually important in building hope towards that future of coexistence in one state even. That you sometimes see people, for understandable reasons, looking at the massive amount of sadistic war crimes from the IDF in Gaza, and seeing it as a totally sick society, that a solid block of every settler.
Can you wind up there?
so-called.
Come on.
But yeah, so I think your point is important in that way. The breaks that are starting to happen on the issue specifically of the genocide, but towards a one-state solution as the ideal. I'd also just like to quickly ask about this Tony Blair plan, because it doesn't seem to be a step towards either one state or two. And do you think there's any realistic prospect of Tony Blair becoming the viceroy of Gaza? I find that hard to believe myself, and it's interesting that in the discussions of the Trump plan being accepted and Netanyahu looking quite isolated even from Trump, it's not talking about Tony Blair, it's talking about return of hostages and
Can you wind it up there, comrade? Because we've got a lot of people to go through.
Yeah, in terms of that next step, if we get there, and Mr. Blair.
Thanks,
well,
Ian.
I guess
can we go through a couple of people and then we'll come back to you. Roy.
Okay, I hope I remember everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. October 7th was not, many people would hold, there was not a total surprise to the Israeli regime. And I think that puts the scenario a little differently for many of us who have been told as well that a fair number of people who were killed, of the 1,200 who were killed on October 7th, the Israeli army and those who were deployed to control the situation had actually shot and killed a fair number of the people who were killed on October 7th. The other issue that I wanted you to touch on briefly would be, what damage did the Iranian missiles do to Israel? Over the last 2 years, Israel has inflicted serious damages on several countries in the region. The retaliation from Iran has knocked a fair amount of damage in Israel, and perhaps just a little glimpse from your side as to what you've seen there. And the third point that I wanted to raise is that, like Ian, I also wanted to find out what appetite do the people of Israel have, especially those who are there for a dismantling of the fascist state. The consequences of a genocide war that has taken place to the extent that Israel has inflicted on Gaza and broadly Palestine, and since October 7th and over a long period of time, in normal circumstances, whether it was Rwanda or Germany or so on, one would expect a dismantling of that fascist state, dismantling of the state of Israel, and as the cry has been, from the river to the sea, what prospects are there for that? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, comrade. Norma.
Thank you so much, Ofer, for your presentation and contribution. Thanks, really. I have quickly 3 points. You can take as comment or questions. First, as you clearly presented, the word today, genocide, is very important in all, including the solidarity campaigns and so on. And the problem is that in many countries too, this word is not just a question of semantics, of linguistics. This word, because it's attached historically to the Jewish people, it takes some said reaction to do not use that in order to do not trivialize. It's not my opinion, but just explaining. For instance, here in France, and that independent of the semantic, it's important the solidarity with the Palestinian people and with the Palestinian and recognition of Palestinian state in these moments, which is another point you made, and that all within this this situation. And because even, and I think it's important, because you mentioned no pasarán, which I understand very well, of course, and you mentioned dirty word. I understand also from my original country what that means. And even in those situations, the right side of different governments or society were in solidarity with the victims, recognizing just as a human rights movement, and also as an humanitarian crisis. And with Palestinian now is not even in the right, because Palestinian situation introduced itself in this moment in the internal political and social situations of many and most of the countries. And even the right side set of population or government do not recognize and do not take that just as human right situation or humanitarian crisis, to see how much this divides. And last but not least, because you should know that also is a very important solidarity movement in any, for instance, talking from Paris, from France, any social movements or rights and so on, go with the Palestinian support, even if nothing is in the manifestation for Palestine, but in Argentinian too, for instance. Now, what you said about Trump proposal, not about Trump, let us separate. I mean, you know, we know, etc. What you said about Trump, I don't know if I understand you well, or if in this point I should make these clarifications. Perhaps Trump proposal at this moment, even if could be transitory, we do not know. I mean, even you said it's contradictory, he changed and so on, but let us take at this moment. It could be taken something as a positive, as a year balloon for the Palestinian people who are suffering this war and this extermination, which can be put as a synonym of genocide and whatever. I agree. So perhaps that it should be taken just as a year of oxygen of balloon for people, as a pause, as a because it's an endless conflict. And I mean, other points as the role of Iran, I think is important to introduce too. So with that, I end now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Norma. Okay.
I would like to
yeah,
answer.
you can come back on that lot now. Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to begin with the saying, as if, you know, among those 1,200 and more who were killed on the 7th October, many of them were killed by Israeli troops. Some of them were, we don't know how many. I wouldn't cling to conspiracy theories as if, you know, there was a kind of a real conspiracy or plan beforehand, between Netanyahu and Hamas, or the government of Israel and Hamas, to carry out one or another attack. I wouldn't go there. It is true that some were killed by Israeli troops. We don't know how many. We know for sure about some incidents. We know for sure there were at least few dozens. but I don't know how many. And so I wouldn't like, to talk too much about it because I don't know. I guess that one of the reasons that Netanyahu and his collaborators do whatever they can in order to prevent a national committee, investigation committee, is because of that. They don't want the truth to be heard. And this is part of the truth, I guess. So this is one thing. Secondly, about how much the government of Israel or other within the Israeli establishment, and Netanyahu perhaps in particular, knew that something was going to happen. Again, I am consistently against any kind of conspiracy theories for different reasons. If you like, philosophical, historical, that doesn't matter. So I refuse to believe that there was a kind of a relation or connection between Netanyahu or one of the Israeli establishment and Sinwar or one of Hamas regarding something that was going to happen. What I can say and do believe is that there was some information that something was about to happen, but not to that extent. And that Netanyahu, and I said that, by the way, in an interview I had on the 9th of October, 2023, in an interview to an American radio program, I think it was, in the United States, I said that the government of Israel was interested in violence in order to pursue the very same plan I mentioned before of Smotrich's. And I still think that is the case, but I do not believe that it was to the extent that really happened in the end, but perhaps to a very much lesser so. This is something I do believe. As to the one state, two states, here I can also combine my answer with the last question that the first comrade asked, and I forgot his name, I'm sorry, and I didn't have the time to answer. And this is about the issue of class. As many of you probably remember, Karl Marx changed his mind regarding the key to the Irish-English conflict and the proletarian revolution. In the beginning, Marx wrote that the English and Irish proletarians should together launch a revolution against their exploiters. But he changed his mind and said afterwards that the key to the what he called the British Revolution was the liberation of Ireland from the British imperialism and colonization. Lenin took this Marxist view more systematically and wrote much more about the issue of occupation, imperialism, colonialism, and class struggle in so many texts. And what he said in the bottom line is that one of the reasons that occupation and colonization and imperialism serve the exploiters, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, was the hostility that they could keep between the proletarian of the occupier and the proletarian of the occupied. And one of the reasons that Lenin mentioned, they supported the right of nations to self-determination, is to reduce this hostility and by that to promote the class struggle. So in a very interesting debate that Lenin had with Karl Radek within Russia, of course he had some other with Rosa Luxemburg and Georgy Lukács and others, but within Russia itself, we had a very interesting debate that was documented and written with Karl Radek. Karl Radek believed that the solution to national hostility and oppression and occupation was by a combination or unity of proletarians of different nations to one struggle. Lenin, for the reasons that I already mentioned, said that sometimes separation between different proletarians is useful to win in the end the unity of the proletarians of the world. So I think that the one-state solution, apart from being unrealistic, given the circumstances, and especially since October 7th, when the hostility is much higher and the mistrust is much deeper, the one-state democratic state solution is much less realistic than before, and it was not realistic before either, in my view. But on top of that, what we need now, in order to sharpen the class struggle with the intention of winning it, is to reduce the hostility. And reduction of such hostility cannot be achieved without the liberation of the Palestinian people in the form of its own Palestinian independent state in the old territory, and that is in the old territories that Israel occupied in 1967. One state under the current circumstances, and I emphasize the current circumstances, is a receipt to a catastrophe, not only in the sense of the continuation of the hostility, but also the more oppression of the Palestinian people and more hostility that will render the class struggle void. So in that sense, I support the two-state solution. And once it is achieved, and it will be achieved, perhaps in the future, upon consent, there will be something else, like one state of federation or who knows what. There's no doubt that Israel is the neighborhood bully. We saw that recently even more so, when Israel aggression was directed not only against the Palestinians, but also against Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Yemen, etc. And of course, we had to finish it. That's against the interest of the peoples, including, of course, the Israeli people. I never supported, and we never support targeting innocent civilians within Israel either. I visited some of the places that were struck by Iranian missiles in order to support the peoples, because I'm against it. But the key to stop this from going on is, of course, the key was always the liberation of the Palestinian people. And because of that, and that goes back to what I said about Trump's proposal, and I agree with the last speaker, sorry for not remembering the names, Norma, I think Norma. I agree that we cannot, unfortunately, I wish we could, we cannot reject now the proposal of Trump because of the current situation. What we need now is first and foremost to stop the genocide and to release the hostages. That's the most important thing. And with all my resentment and with all my resentments from that proposal and reservations from it, that's a starting point. The starting point is by the dialogue beginning tomorrow. It should be very clear that without guarantees to end the genocide, nothing will happen. We saw what happened last March. The reason that the carnage goes on in Gaza and wars, and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and the sacrifice of the hostages, the reason that those go on is because the government of Israel violated the accords that were already there. There were a few stages, and after the first stage, it was Israel who broke it because there were no guarantees. So what now everybody speaks about could be achieved months ago and perhaps even 1 year ago. So if there are no guarantees tomorrow by the international community that the release of the hostages will necessarily lead to a total end of the genocide and withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip, nothing will be achieved. So what I'm saying in the bottom line is that we have to embrace the Trump's proposal as a starting point, but we must also insist on those guarantees, otherwise it won't go anywhere. Last thing, and I hope I didn't forget anything. Yes, we have to use the term genocide, and we should never use sugar-coated terms, because once we do, I compare it to a medical doctor, we have to make the right diagnosis in order to give the correct remedy. And if we do not make the right diagnosis, we are going to err in giving the remedy, the medicine. And the diagnosis is the genocide term. We must use it. It's not popular. I've been suspended from the Knesset in the last 2 years for almost 300 days because I've been insisting to use the term genocide. And one of the comrades before, sorry again that I do not remember the name, said or referred to the case I was violently removed from the podium because I said genocide, by the way, and I quoted someone else. And but that didn't help me, because it's forbidden in the Knesset to say genocide. That's the reason I've been mainly the main reason why I've been suspended almost 1 entire year in the last 2 years. But I shall continue. Even if I pay the price, I'll be resuspended, because that's the truth. It's not only my right to tell the truth, it's my obligation, precisely because of, like Norma said, we have to face reality in order to amend it. And I hope I answered everything.
Yeah, thank you very much, Corey. Yeah, Steve, you need to be brief because we're now running out of time.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Ofer. It's really good to see you again. And
thank you. Same here.
And solidarity with everything that you've been doing. It's fun to actually doing what you're doing, right, as it were, in the heart of the beast, requires tremendous courage. Now, there were 3 things. Obviously, the question of fascism, the question of what is a peaceful long-term solution, 1 state, 2 states, and then the question of the Trump plan. I want to concentrate just on one of those, which I think is important, and that's the question of fascism, which you raised with us before. Now, if we think about that, about the idea of Israel being a fascist state, if you looked at Gaza, you could say, well, see what's happening there. If you looked at the West Bank, you could see what's happening there. Those are real evidence of fascism in practice. And then, as you said, internally within Israel itself, all the evidence that you've given us, there's a slight contradiction, because it seems as if civil society is not totally crushed and there is some independence. It's not sort of total fascism, and you still have a constitution of some kind or other. But nevertheless, I think it's right to call it fascism. Now, the reason I say that is that the left in England, where we are here, it seems to me extremely reluctant to use that term. Now, fascism is a better term because it's the Italian example, using it about Il Duce as opposed to the German Nazi example, which is much more explosive as an idea and much more controversial. But the English left is happy to talk about settler colonial state. He's happy to talk about an apartheid state. He's happy, I'm saying happy is not the right word really, but relaxed to talk about genocide, but doesn't really want to press this nuclear option of calling Israel a fascist, nearly fascist state. If it's not 100% fascist, then the fact is you use it as you do the term genocide, because you want to stop it becoming that. You want to oppose it. And I think for the left here in England, we have to use this term, and we have to, the message, and what you've said about it gives us confidence to be able to say that. We've not just sat here in England and thought that's something from afar. You're the person who's the witness of this happening. And I think one thing I'd like to see from this is that the left in England use this powerful term, actually, which we don't really use. And we're missing a very important thing to be able to say that.
Thanks, Steve. Ken.
Hi, thank you very much, Ofer, for explaining to us what's happening inside Israel. My question relates to the dynamics between Trump and Netanyahu. Specifically, when Hamas said they were going to release the hostages, Trump said to Israel, stop bombing Gaza immediately. This appears to have simply been ignored by Netanyahu. Now, was that simply theatre by Trump, or does it indicate that Netanyahu can now operate to a level and ignore what Trump says, or is there some other explanation? I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you again.
Okay. Thanks, Aman.
Another, okay.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, just a quick thing. I just wanted to say about the issue of what Orcas raised, and thank you very much for the commentary. I think one of the main points was here is to understanding from what actually bring the working person in Israel or in Palestine together, and recognizing the situation together in terms of the divide which is there, which is massive, it's huge divide which is there, and what is the better way than a two-state that can actually do it. I agree with Orcas on this. I think this is the answer. And historically, there have been situations like, for example, the situation of the Kurds in Iraq, with the huge amount of gap that there was there in Iraq. The left did say separation of Kurdistan does make sense in order to bring the workers together. And I think that that's a very, very good, viable answer in terms of the two-state at the moment, rather than actually thinking about the two-state from what Macron or Keir Starmer is saying. The situation is very different too, and I think that's, again, a good point to mention, that he did mention that the situation of South Africa and the situation that you had in there is very different to what we have in Israel and Palestine in terms of the gap and the divide that exists. And I think that that's a good point to bear in mind. Overall, Cassim, I enjoyed thoroughly from what you said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to answer because
Yeah.
5 minutes. First of all, as to fascism within Israel, when I say that there's already a fascist regime in Israel, I say it with all the responsibility, political responsibility that I can, act upon. Because I mentioned few things of what constitutes fascism, but of course, that was, as I said, only the tip of the iceberg, because first, there are many other aspects, and I just mentioned another one, and this is the violence within Israel. There is a political violence in Israel on a daily basis. It's not only the police that, as I said, was already conquered by the government and Ben Gvir and turned into a militia that attacks violently and arrests against the Israeli law, by the way, against the Israeli law and against the decisions of the courts. The police systematically and violently arrest people who demonstrate against the government, including families of the hostages, on a daily basis. There are decisions, a few decisions, for instance, by the Supreme Court, including by the legal counselor of the police itself, that it is forbidden to confiscate placards in demonstrations, and the police still does it violently. There is a violent by fascist mob against activists, including, again, family of the hostages and victims who were murdered by Hamas. A couple of weeks ago, a tent that was built in front of the Knesset 2 years ago by a friend of mine, whose son was killed on October 7th, was attacked by a fascist mob, and the police refrained from coming there to protect them. A synagogue was attacked by a fascist mob because they screened the alternative commemoration day in that synagogue. I mean, the commemoration day, every year there is a commemoration day of the victims of the war, etc., etc. There is always an alternative ceremony of Palestinians and Israelis together. We were so many that there was no space for everyone, so they screened it in different places across the country. And within a synagogue in the city of Ra'anana, a fascist mob broke the windows of the synagogue. We all remember where it happened before. and pogromed those who watched the ceremony. They are already threats to turn the next elections into a fraudulent ones. The police and some armed militias are already planned by the government to be sent to Arab cities and villages and to leftist neighborhoods in order to terrorize people from going out to vote. So when I'm talking about fascism running amok within Israel, I'm talking about a huge list. And of course, there are many bills and laws. There are already bills that may be enacted very soon that will totally eliminate the independence of the judicial system, some of which was already abolished. Same about the independence of the media. So everything together, civil society in Israel is very limited already. And it is limited only to the extent that we are dealing with organizations that are identified as leftist. For instance, donations. The vast majority of the donations that leftist, so-called leftist organizations, civil society have are from state apparatuses. The majority of the money that a rightist organization, civil society get are from private enterprise. And because of that, there's law that already passed that prevent organizations from getting easily money only from state apparatus. So that keeps intact the situation of the rightist ones. And there are many other examples. That is fascism, my friends. That's one thing. About the working class and the exploited class and ruled class in Israel in general. The Marxist sociologist Perry Anderson, that perhaps you know, he wrote about 40 years ago a very interesting piece. The question he raised was, how come that the most exploited and oppressed and marginalized working class among the white people in the southern of the United States for so many decades prefer to cooperate with their exploiters, often via the KKK, against the black exploited and oppressed, rather than together with the blacks against their exploiters. And the answer was in two terms: psychological compensation. To feel as if you are part of the dominated nation, although you are in fact marginalized and excluded. That's exactly what's going on in Israel for ages. The so-called Oriental Jews, Mizrahim, Jews who are originated in Islamic and Arab states, are the most exploited and marginalized and excluded among the Jewish communities in Israel. Their majority, not all of them, but the majority support the fascist right and especially worship Netanyahu, because they know how to manipulate the situation by supplying them with such a psychological compensation. That's one of the main reasons, and that is something we have to break. I didn't mention before, as part of the optimism that I share, that in the last year, or perhaps even a bit more, we in Hadash, including the Communist Party, of course, with other no less than 70 movements and organizations, 70, we formed the Peace Partnership. different human rights organizations, anti-genocide and occupation organizations, feminists, etc. We have there one of those organizations is the Oriental Civil Forum, which is a leftist, anti-Zionist, basically, Oriental Jewish organization. Is part of it. And I hope we'll succeed. By the way, another organization is the leftist religious group. So it's very difficult, but we don't give up. And the last thing, and here I have to finish with your permission, the bombing in Gaza continue. Only yesterday, about 60 were killed by Israel after the order, so to speak, of Trump's to hold fire. But what Israel has been doing is two things. First of all, to deny the truth. And secondly, they had the permission, if you like, or the acceptance of Trump's to use fire as a defensive tool. So they present it as a defense. And they will probably will continue in that. I hope not. And as I said before, I hope that tomorrow we'll see a very fast dialogue that will put an end to this nightmare, both to the Palestinians and to the families of the hostages. I surely hope so. We'll do our share to achieve that. Unfortunately, our input is not enough, and we need yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade. Eric, do you want to say anything particularly brief?
Yeah, good morning. Super brief. Very interesting discussion. I'd like to ask and say on a number of topics, but where you just left off, I was at a rally here in Oakland, California yesterday, about 5,000 people, to stop arms shipments through the port of Oakland, which is one of the larger ports in the U.S., I believe one of the larger ones in the world.
Good for you.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not looking for brownie points. More to the point, the movement here is quite different than in Europe. You know, there's much less working class participation, more middle class. Not entirely, but to just ask, it's a hot mess, the movement. It's a very complicated, different currents, some good, some really not very good. If you could just drop out of the sky and direct the movement outside of Israel, Palestine, to how to support this, what would you want people to do? What's the most effective? And thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you very much. I think in brief that we reached the stage in which the international community must do whatever possible to boycott Israel as a whole. We need, it's not against Israel. I want to say that. It's for next generations of Israelis as well. Boycott, ban, even break relations with Israel. We need it because otherwise I cannot see how that nightmare ends.
Okay, do you want to make any final remarks? Oh, yeah. Yeah, are you
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Did you want to say anything finally, just to wrap it up?
Me?
Yeah.
Just like to thank you and bear in mind that I have no intention to harm myself. So if something happens to me, it wasn't me.
I think we're all you know, in awe of your courage in remaining in that position. The conditions, as you say, of, you know, the use of violence becoming a normal, normal thing by the state and other actors in the far right. So. Roger.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to wrapping up the meeting, first of all, I cannot express our solidarity and our gratitude more emphatically. I thought it was really absolutely clear and enlightening explanation by Comrade Ofer.
Thank you.
We really do offer our solidarity. We know that you heroically placed yourself in the firing line and have come under already brutal attack. And we hope that you will be able to maintain your position and that you will stay safe. And of course, that you will continue to raise your very clear platform. Comrade, I'd also like to say that we do meet every week. We have, there were actually, you raised a question about the composition of the meeting here. There are actually comrades here from 13 countries.
Wow,
And
that's impressive.
the comrade spoke from 6 countries. And we meet every week. We are monitoring and discussing and trying to reach conclusions about struggles that take place around the world. And you're very, very welcome. I hope we can put your name on our mailing list.
I would like that. Thank you very much.
Future meetings.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. I would be delighted, of course.
Right,
Thank you so very much for your support and solidarity. That means a lot.
Well, thank you. I hope so, comrade. I hope we can do at least play some part in helping to liberate the people of Gaza and the people also of Israel from the monstrous regime that they're suffering under. And I'd like to say for next week, we continuing our series on the inspiring youth uprising that is sweeping through, I was going to say sweeping through Asia, but it's now actually gone beyond Asia. It's now, since we met last week, there have been similar uprisings in Morocco and also in Madagascar, which have taken their cue quite explicitly from the struggles that they've seen in Nepal and in Indonesia, and previously in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka and in Thailand and throughout the Asian region. So next week we have a comrade from Philippines who's going to speak about the new upsurge that's taken place in the last week or so. And I welcome everybody. I hope you'll all participate and spread the word to other comrades too. Thanks again to Ofer, and thank you to all the comrades who participated.
Thank you, Ofer.
Thank you very much, and all the best. I have to leave. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you, comrade.
Keep
Bye,
safe.
thank you.
Keep safe. Thank you.